Thanks for joining me for the next 30 minutes or so as we look at one of the parables of Jesus found in the Gospel of Luke chapter 16. Before we launch in, I just want to remind you and thank you as well for your support jumping on our website, www.myfaithchurch.org. Thank you for your contribution. You can click the contribution button there, or you can text a contribution to 73256. Hopefully, you're taking advantage of some of the free resources that we have made available for you on our website. Instructions of how to create your own Right Now Media account, a Netflix type of Bible studies that you can feed yourself, as well as some instructions of how to download the YouVersion Bible app. You can also receive some incredible resources that we send out to you on Monday that reinforce what we talk about on Sunday. And the way to receive those is you text this, My Faith Church, all one word, to this number, 888-403-4294. You will get all kinds of stuff, usually once a week, once every couple of weeks, some reinforcement material that you can look up and just goes along with what we're talking about on Sunday. Well, until we launch our brand new teaching series in the middle of October on the Sermon on the Mount, we're going to be looking at this. Until then, we're on a bit of a mini teaching series on some of the parables of Jesus. Last couple of weeks, we've looked at a couple of parables. One of the parables is an owner of a vineyard who hires workers during different times of the day, and at the end of the day, pays the workers, whether they worked all day or whether they just worked 1 hour or somewhere in between, the same wage. And this parable was told by Jesus not to teach us how an employer should treat his employees, but it's a parable about grace. And it's truly about receiving not a wage when it comes to the grace of God, but we receive a gift. And so stop comparing ourselves with other people. Understand that what we receive is not something that we've earned. If that was the case, we'd be in big trouble, according to Romans 6:23. For we have earned separation from God, and we have earned death. But it's a parable about grace. We looked at the other side of the coin last week, if you were able to join us, another owner of a vineyard, a parable that Jesus told about really a guy who rented out his ground to tenants. And over a number of years, they were to gather his harvest of his grapes and give him kind of what was arranged, a contract in a sense. And he sent his servants to these tenants who he had rented out this land to, and they mistreated his servants. They killed one of them. He kept on sending them, and eventually he sends his son, this wealthy man, this owner of this vineyard, to collect, his arrangement of the crops. His son was killed. Obviously, this was an illustration of what Jesus was saying. You're here, you're living on rented ground. This is not your life. This is not your time, right? God has planted you here. And I keep on sending you prophets. I keep on sending you preachers. And eventually I send you my son and you mistreat him. If you reject my grace, then there's going to be the other side of the coin. There's going to be judgment. And so both of these parables are about God's grace. And when God's grace is rejected, there's judgment on the other side. And so we've been spending some time looking at these two parables. Well, we're going to look at a parable, and it's found in Luke chapter 16 here. Probably one of the most confusing parables of Jesus. He actually takes a guy who is a scoundrel. He's a cheat. He's lazy. He is not doing a good job at his job of taking care of a very wealthy man's estate. He just kind of lives this life of luxury and wastes it. And finally, the wealthy man figures this out. He's going to fire this guy. And so we'll read this in a moment, but you think in the end, this guy is going to get what he deserves, but actually Jesus makes him out to be the hero in this parable. Now, we've already mentioned that a third of the teachings of Jesus are in parables. And we're told very clearly in Matthew chapter 13 why that is. And it's because parables reveal hearts. A parable is a teaching tool that Jesus used, and he was definitely the master of it. And parables speak to a different portion of our mind and our heart. It has a way of revealing things, revealing our hearts, than perhaps just stating the facts outright does not. Parables just have a way of getting to the heart of the issue. And Jesus says, as his disciples asked him in Matthew chapter 13, why do you speak to the people in parables? And Jesus says it's because it's going to provide clarity to my disciples, to my people who follow me, and it's going to cause confusion to those who are not following me. And it reveals their hearts. So we know that parables reveal hearts, but also we know that Jesus, besides his parables, a lot of his teaching had to do with our view and our handling of money. And the reason why is not because Jesus is greedy or Jesus really needs our money or good grief, he doesn't. He owns a cattle on 1,000 hills, right? But there's no better indicator of what is in our hearts than how we handle money. And Jesus said very clearly in one of his teachings, he said, where your money is, there your heart is also. And the reason why Jesus said this is because you can lie. You can lie about what you say that you love, but your checkbook doesn't lie. Your checkbook and your date book, those two resources that you have, your time and your money, it does not lie what truly you love, what truly are your priorities. And so that is why Jesus uses the subject of money so many times as he's teaching, is because it is linked to our hearts. It is linked to what we truly value. Now, the reason why I'm saying this money thing, is because out of the third of Jesus' teachings, there are parables. A third of his teachings are parables, but a third of the parables have to deal with money. And so we are sort of doubling down here on the revelation of people's hearts when Jesus tells a parable, and it is a parable about money. I mean, Jesus is just honing in two times, right? He's multiplying, he's doubling down when he tells a parable, and the subject of it is money. It is revealing somebody's heart. Now, I'm going to read this parable. It might not be a very well-known parable to you. In fact, it's one of those parables that we quickly maybe just pass over because it's kind of confusing. It's very rarely preached on, but it is one of these parables where, and maybe this is the reason why it's not commented or taught upon. It will push you to one side or the other. You either going to listen to this or come on Sunday and listen to this message on this parable, and you're going to embrace it, or you're going to be angry and you're never going to come again. And this is a lot of what Jesus' parables, after somebody heard this, especially his parables about money, where it drives them either to him or it drives them away from him. But what it will not do, it will not allow you to remain in the middle, unaffected. You will have to respond to this parable. You either will hate it or you will embrace it, but you have to pay attention to it. And so I'm going to read, it's called the parable of the shrewd manager. It's found in Luke chapter 16. Let me just read it here. Jesus told his disciples, now here's the context of this. Jesus is telling this to his disciples, but he knows that the Pharisees are listening in. And we know that because of the end of this encounter. We'll see that he pretty much just talks to them directly. But he knows the Pharisees are listening, but he's telling this to his disciples. Jesus told his disciples, there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. Now, in the previous chapter 15, Jesus tells three parables about things that are lost. One sheep out of 99, one coin out of 10, and then one son out of 2. We probably know this last parable as the parable of the prodigal son. Now we know the prodigal son asked for his inheritance early. He basically said to his dad, you're only good to me, Dad, give me my inheritance. And he took his inheritance and he wasted it on wild living. This is the same word that is used. And so this manager is misusing, he is living in such a way with no regard for tomorrow, and this is the word that is used. And so the rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions, and so he called him in and asked him, what is this that I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you can no longer be my manager any longer. Now, if you fire somebody, You don't give them a chance or an opportunity to go back to their accounts that they're responsible for and kind of close them down. If you're going to fire somebody, you're not going to allow them an opportunity to perhaps do things to take advantage of the situation. But this is a parable. And so Jesus is doing this because it's so essential to the story. This wouldn't have happened in real life. This guy wouldn't have been given 2 weeks. He would have been fired on the spot and probably put in jail. But because of the story of what Jesus's point is, we see that this guy, he knows he's going to lose his job. He's given time to sort of settle accounts. This would have been very common. A wealthy man would have hired various managers to settle their accounts or help with their estates, or bill collectors, basically. So now there's a period of time where this guy knows he's going to lose his job, but he has time to go and close up the accounts, right? He wouldn't have been done. Would not have been done in real life, but it's essential to the parable. So the manager, he says to himself, "What shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm too ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do, so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses." So he sees that there's an end to the life of luxury that he's living. And so he has to secure his second life, the second stage of life. What can he do? And so he goes, well, these people that owe my master, this wealthy man, debts, I'm going to do favors for them, so that they will say, hey, thank you so much for doing this. If you ever need a place to stay, why don't you come and stay right here? And the reason why is because the manager is not just losing his job, but he's staying on the estate. That would have been very common. He was losing his house. And so he calls, this is verse 5, he calls each one of his master's debtors. And he asked the first, "How much do you owe my master?" 800 gallons of olive oil, he replied. And the manager told him, "Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 400. So he's cutting it in half. He's giving him a 50% discount. Then he calls the second, "How much do you owe?" And 1,000 shekels of wheat, he replied. He told him, "Take your bill and make it 800, right? And so he's cutting it down 20%, right? The master commended. This is where we get this unusual thing. We think, okay, when is he going to get it in the end? When is he going to get caught? When is Jesus going to come down and say, you can't be dishonest like this? You can't try to work the system. But Jesus actually goes the other way. And this is why this is such a confusing parable. But there's a reason and there's a point why Jesus is doing this. This is verse 8. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than the people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. We'll talk about what that means. And then Jesus kind of continues to put application to this. He says, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with earth or true riches? And if you've not been trustworthy with somebody else's property, who will give you give you your own property? No servant can serve two masters. We've probably heard this part before. No servant can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. The Pharisees who loved money, and so they're listening in, right? The Pharisees who loved money heard all this and were sneering at Jesus. I mean, they're mad. Because they also kind of realize that in many ways, Jesus is accusing them in many ways of working the system, sort of like this dishonest, shrewd manager in the story. But yet Jesus is not calling them a hero. And he said to them, "You are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of men, but God knows your heart." And this is why we know this parable is about heart. And God is using, Jesus, our Lord, is using parables to reveal hearts. And he's also using the topic of money to reveal hearts, because those two combined, it just cuts right through everything. So God knows your heart. What is highly valued among men is detestable in God's sight. Now, this really pushed people to one side or the other. His disciples, as they heard this, they were gravitating to him. The Pharisees, obviously, when they heard this and they understood what Jesus was doing and saying about them, it pushed them to the other side. He revealed their hearts, what was really their God, and that was their wallet. And they were working the system in many ways, like the shrewd manager was working the system in order to secure their place and their style of living, right? So I guess if there's a key thought to all of this, is that your actions are really evidence of what matters to you, of what masters you. Your actions are produced by something that is inside. We've talked about this several times, how everyone has a master. Everyone is controlled by something. We're created beings. And this is as old as the Garden of Eden. You cannot be your own master. You cannot be the captain of your own ship. You cannot say, "I'm the leader of my life. I rule." Because we're created beings, we, just by definition, created beings have a ruler. And as in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, God was their ruler, and they bought into this lie. And this lie is still perpetuated to this day. It's the oldest lie, and it's the most perpetuated lie because it works so well. You can rule yourself. You know what's best for you. You can live your own truth. But the truth is, as soon as Adam and Eve bit into that fruit, believing that they could be their own master and ruler, they were immediately ruled by something else. They were ruled by shame. They were ruled by fear. They covered themselves with fig leaves. They hid. They were ruled by deflection, blaming one another for what they had done in disobedience to God. And that continues throughout all the scripture, and it continues on today, this perpetuated lie that you can be your own master. The truth is, if God isn't your master, if he is not in control, something else controls you. It could be lust, it could be anger, it could be hate, it could be food, it could be your past, it could be shame, it could be guilt, it could be your wallet. If God isn't your master, what is inside, what controls you, will eventually come out. And as Jesus, our Lord, was telling this parable, he was just demonstrating this truth. What is inside will eventually come out. What controls you will come out in your actions. Now, as is in many of Jesus' parables, there is the narrative, there's the narration, then there's the application. There's the narrative and there's the application of it. And so what we're going to do, I'm just going to give you 4 things real quickly. Talk about the narrative first. There's the narration, and then we're going to get to the application. So here's what the scripture is saying, right? Here's the first part, the aspect of our narration. There was carelessness. And we read about this in the first verse. Jesus told his disciples, there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. This is the same word, I talked about this, the same word that was used in the previous chapter in terms of the prodigal son wasting his inheritance. No foresight, no thought of the future, no thought of retirement, and obviously these are parables, and so Jesus is making a point. If you live just for the things of this world, you are pretty much just like the prodigal son, and you're pretty much just like this manager. There's this idea that, I'm going to be really, accountable, and I'm going to put away for retirement. That's all well and good, and the scripture actually supports that. But if there isn't this aspect of how you handle your money in terms of the light of eternity, you're really just details. It's just, you're really just living for this world, and whether or not you're just wasting your possessions to the extreme, like the prodigal son or this shrewd manager who's just living this life as if there's no tomorrow, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. if you're giving no thought of how you're spending your money in terms of what that is going to matter in terms of after you die, beyond your physical retirement, then you're really like this. You're just living for this world. You don't think that there's anything else beyond this. And you're pretty much just wasting. And this is what Jesus is saying. If you call it whatever you want, but if you're not thinking that there is something beyond this world, you're just kind of wasting your life. You're wasting your possessions in the same way that the prodigal son in Luke 15 and the shrewd manager here, the one who is just wasting the wealth, his master's wealth. So there's carelessness. There's a carelessness about life when you are not thinking about eternity. And so the first verse, we see that there's a carelessness. In the second verse, or the third verse, we see that there's a concern. So we're going to have some C's here. So there's carelessness, and now there's concern. And so he calls him in and asks him, what is this that I hear about you? Give us an account of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer. So there's been carelessness. He's been called on his carelessness, and now there's some concern. And this is what he says in verse 3. And so the manager said to himself, what do I do? What do I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, whether that's old, because he's old, or whether or not, he's just kind of accustomed to living this cushy lifestyle for so long. We don't know. This is a story. But he says, you know what? I'm in a tough spot. What am I going to do? I've been living a careless life. I've been caught. I now have a glimpse of what life is going to be perhaps after this life that he's accustomed to. And there's spiritual significance to this. Sometimes whenever we are living like there is no tomorrow and everything is going well, we don't give a whole lot of concern about eternity. You get a little older, your health starts to fail, and guess what? You're going to start thinking about life after this life. And so we see this is sort of like this guy is saying, okay, I've been living this stage of life, living like there's no tomorrow. I've just been told that there's another life that I'm going to have to live after this life. I'm concerned because I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm too prideful. I'm not going to beg. What am I going to do? You see, the light bulb turns on just for a little bit here. Sometimes when it comes to people, you don't want to think about life after this life, especially if you don't know what that life is about. And so you're just going to be reckless and careless and act like there's no end. But guess what? As you get a little longer in the tooth, maybe your health starts to fail. Maybe you start to realize that you're not strong enough to dig and you're too proud to beg, right? And so you start to think, what am I going to do? Well, sometimes that's that light bulb moment that will turn a person to Christ. But unfortunately, this is a parable. This guy's going the other way. And so after this, you got the carelessness, you've got this concern, what am I going to do? And now you have the cunning, the craftiness of this guy. And so he says, what I'm going to do is, what I'll do, this is verse 4, so that when I lose my job here, when I go into the second stage of life, people will welcome me into their houses. And so he calls each one and this master's debtors and, how much do you owe? And so he's settling accounts. He gives them a discount. He's so crafty because he's not just forgiving a complete debt, because that would have been too obvious. And he's not doing it just to one person because, the other people who owed money would have said, oh, look what he's doing. He's gaining accomplices. Everybody's involved in this, but nobody's asking questions. And so he's getting everybody sort of involved in this, and he's reducing it. And he knows that this is an honor society. And so when he gets finally booted from his role, he's going to have a place to stay. What Jesus is doing here, he's just saying this guy knew the system that he was in, and he was just playing the system. And so you've got carelessness, you've got concern, you've got craftiness, and now you have sort of the commendation. And when you expect Jesus to say, okay, and then this guy got caught, he doesn't. He actually commends him. And he's not commending him because his actions are admirable. he's commending him in a way because he is saying he knew the game that he was in. He knew sort of this corrupt system and he's just taking care of himself. It's almost like when somebody does something wrong and you know it's wrong, but they did it so well, you just kind of look to them and go, well played, right? And this is kind of what Jesus is saying here. And he's not commending him for his actions. He's just commending him for his taking care of himself, and he's not saying it's right. He's just saying, boy, if you could have put that effort in and taken care of your master's estate, you probably wouldn't have been in this situation. But when it came right down to it, you just took care of yourself. Now remember, this is a parable, and Jesus is doing this for a point. And he says this. He says, well, the master commended the dishonest manager because he acted shrewdly. And there's a lot of speculation of who this manager is, or the master. Is Jesus done telling his parable, or is he not? If he's not done telling his parable, then the master would have been referred to as the wealthy man. But why in the world would the wealthy man commend this dishonest servant or manager that he had for, sort of taking advantage of his situation and stealing from him? So many people believe that this was Jesus. He's done, and he's referring to himself, sort of like the master. Jesus is saying, well played. And so the master commended the dishonest manager because he acted shrewdly. And then here's the connector. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than the people of the light. Now, this is where the application comes in. So we've talked about the narration. There's carelessness, there was concern, there was craftiness or cunning, and then there was this commendation. Well, here we're going to get into the application, and this is where Jesus is starting to apply this parable. And this would be the first application. Invest wisely. When Jesus says this, he says, the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than the people of light. He's basically saying this. This guy believed what he believed, and he was willing to do whatever it took because he lived in this world. If this was the only world that he knew, if the only world that existed, he did whatever he possibly could to gain friends, to secure a place for his future, that he had a place to stay. And Jesus is basically using a bad example to make a good point. And he's saying this: if we truly, as believers, acted like we say that we believe, then we would be just as ambitious and just as, in a sense, shrewd in taking advantage of our resources and our investments to invest in people for eternity. And basically what Jesus is saying is this: are you using to your advantage what you have available to you to invest in the kingdom? Are you using your money? The greatest use of your money, your time, your investment, right, is not just about your retirement here on this earth. This life is going to come to an end. But are you able to invest in eternity? You've probably heard somebody say this: you can't take it with you. That's not exactly true. And then some people would say, well, I've never seen a U-Haul behind a hearse, and that's true. But according to the words of Jesus, you can't take it with you, but you can send it ahead of you. In fact, in the Sermon on the Mount, and we will get this in the middle of October when we start this series on the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, do not lay up treasures of this world where thieves can break in and moths and rust destroy, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. You can pay it ahead. You can lay it up, send it ahead of you by how you invest in God's kingdom. You see, Jesus accepted people's support. The Apostle Paul accepted support from other people. Now, Jesus was also a carpenter, and Paul was also a tent maker. But we also know that all the disciples accepted people's investing in them to proclaim the gospel. And so there's a professional, corporate aspect with this, but there's also a personal aspect. One of the best uses of your money would be to take someone out for lunch on your own dime and tip well, and talk to them about their relationship with Jesus, if they have one or if they don't. That is a good investment of your time and your money. You can't take it with you, but Jesus says you can send it ahead of you. And so when Jesus says is this, invest in friends, right? What's he saying there? He's saying the way that you invest your time and your money, wouldn't it be great when you get to heaven to have all these people welcoming you and say it's because of your investment that you supported this missionary or you supported this ministry and because of your dime, you've sent it ahead. And as a result, an opportunity was shared with someone that perhaps that opportunity wouldn't have been there because the money presented itself for that opportunity to be there. And they came to a saving knowledge of Jesus. And I think you know what I'm saying there. The best investment of your earthly money is in the heavenly kingdom. And so what Jesus is saying is just invest wisely. The second thing that he is saying in terms of application is this understanding of our application, and it is this. It is begin now. He says, whoever can be trusted with very little can be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you've not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who can trust you with true riches? So begin where you are. I've heard people say at times, what, if I had more, I'd give more. And according to the words of Jesus, he's saying this, no, you would not. So the excuse that I just don't have enough, and if I had more, then I'd give more, Jesus is saying that is not valid. Wealth does not make you generous. Accumulating more wealth will just make you more greedy, if you're greedy. And so Jesus is just saying, start small, invest wisely, but begin now. And the third thing that he says in terms of application is be devoted to one. Jesus says no one can serve two masters. We've talked about this. You will be ruled by something. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Here's the issue. And it is an issue that is prevalent in 95% of people who are believers. You've got to deal with this issue of money. Money is this idea, well, it's my security, and the Lord is your security. And the Lord loves you. When it comes to your masters, and you'll be mastered by something, and money can be your master. Anything other than God that masters you does not love you. If God is your master, if he is your ruler, he loves you. He's going to provide for you. He's going to take care of you. You will have no needs. He will meet all of your needs. All the scripture says this. So when we give up our money to the Lord and allow him to handle it, and we follow his commandments regarding wise stewardship, we resolve this issue. And when this issue is resolved, let me tell you, there's freedom. There's a freedom from worry. There's a freedom from fret. There's a freedom from guilt and shame. When you just simply resolve this issue and say, Lord, you are my master. My possessions do not possess me. My wallet does not possess me. My wallet does not rule me. You are my master. There is this freedom. Now, when Jesus said this parable, because the Pharisees' masters were money, that was it. They sneered and they just walked away. When you hear this parable, you're either going to react like Jesus' disciples, or you're going to act like the Pharisees. There's really no middle ground. So here's my takeaway for this. How are you going to respond to this? You can't stay in the middle. Well, the Lord bless you and the Lord keep you. May his face shine upon you and give you strength until we meet again. God bless.